was a cultural earthquake reshaping music and poetry for generations. But even legends have their limits, and these 7 artists pushed his patience to the breaking point, and trust me, when you hear what the second to last one did, you'll understand why. Number 7 is Eric Clapton. For years, these two gave off the impression that they were in the same club. Mutual respect, shared stages, and those unplanned jam sessions that fans talked about like they'd witnessed history. Clapton was quick to acknowledge Dylan's gift for words, and Dylan admired Clapton's guitar genius. It seemed like an unshakable bond. Then came the late 70s when Dylan was exploring his gospel-inspired period. Instead of nodding along to Dylan's spiritual experiment, Clapton allegedly decided to voice his thoughts to a mutual producer, thoughts that would change everything. He supposedly said Dylan was losing it, which isn't the kind of critique you can easily brush off. And as if that wasn't enough, Clapton reportedly hinted that the poetic rock crown might be ready for a new ruler. Himself. Not exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who called you a friend. Dylan's reaction? No public outrage, no headline-making feud, just the surgical precision of canceling a joint recording session that was quietly in the works. Gone. No reason given, no room for guessing what happened. That's Dylan's style. He doesn't shout, he erases. And under all those polite smiles for the press, Dylan viewed Clapton's gentlemanly charm as a polished surface covering a sharp, calculated edge. Once he saw that, the friendship was frozen solid for decades. If you think that's chilly, the next story makes this one look almost warm. Number 6 is Leonard Cohen. This one stings because Dylan's admiration for Cohen wasn't fake or fleeting. He once publicly declared Cohen to be the highest level of songwriting, a compliment so rare from Dylan, it's practically a knighthood. But admiration doesn't cancel out rivalry. Cohen's major rise came in the late 60s, right after Dylan had stepped back from the public eye due to his motorcycle crash. Into the gap stepped Cohen, with his monk-like presence and brooding poetry, and the world couldn't get enough of him. His calm, intellectual style contrasted sharply with Dylan's restless, unpredictable energy, making Dylan's approach seem almost reckless by comparison. Then, in the early 70s, Cohen gave an interview where he said Dylan's early songs were juvenile compared to mature poets. Maybe he thought it was a harmless academic musing. Dylan didn't hear it that way. To him, it was a betrayal, especially coming from someone who knew how hard the climb was. And Dylan has a way of remembering things like that for decades. Fast forward to 2016 when Cohen passed away. Fans expected Dylan to craft something heartfelt, a poetic farewell worthy of their intertwined legacies. What they got was 3 short lines. No emotion, no depth, just the bare minimum acknowledgement. For someone as expressive as Dylan, that silence was loud. Respect and resentment can live in the same space, but in this case, the resentment seemed to have the upper hand, and if that sounds like the quiet burn of a grudge, the next story is more like a slap in broad daylight. Number 5 is Paul McCartney. Dylan respected his talent, sure, but they were never on the same wavelength. Dylan vibed with Lennon's sharp wit and rebel spirit, while Paul was polished, pop-friendly, and loved crafting tunes that could charm an entire stadium. Dylan's music was never about being universally pleasing. It lived in darker corners, full of jagged edges and complicated truths. So their paths crossed without really blending. Then, in 1987, Paul decided to offer his opinion in a magazine interview. He said Dylan wasn't writing songs people could remember anymore. Maybe Paul thought it was just harmless honesty, but in Dylan's world, that was a shot fired. And it came at the worst time because the two were supposed to be planning a joint tour. After that comment, the tour was scrapped. Publicly, the excuse was bad timing, but behind the scenes, no one doubted the real reason. Dylan didn't need to make a public scene. The cancellation said it all. In private, he summed up the difference between them with one cutting line. Paul writes love letters, I write scars. That's not just about writing style, it's about purpose. Dylan wasn't in the business of polishing the edges to make songs go down easy, and Paul's comment was a reminder of just how different their worlds were. The two kept things civil when cameras were around, but whatever warmth had been there was gone for good. Number 4 is Michael Bloomfield. This is the guy whose electric guitar work on Highway 61 Revisited didn't just turn heads, it practically slapped the entire folk world awake. Bloomfield's sharp, spontaneous style was exactly what Dylan needed at that moment. It was the sound of a new era kicking the door down. But then, right after the album's success, Bloomfield basically vanished. He turned down touring offers, skipped out on future recording sessions, And when people asked why, it was either too much pressure or other vague excuses. Whatever it was, Dylan was left hanging. This wasn't just any sideman. This was the guy Dylan had trusted during a career-defining transformation. And then came the salt in the wound. Years later, Bloomfield gave interviews where he flat out implied that he had saved Dylan's career by making him rock. He wasn't subtle about it either. He even went so far as to suggest he was the true architect of folk rock, as if Dylan was just tagging along for the ride. For Dylan, that wasn't just irritating, it was rewriting history in a way that pushed him out of his own story. That kind of betrayal doesn't get a "let's grab coffee and catch up" moment. After that, Dylan stopped praising Bloomfield publicly. No more warm mentions, no more casual name drops. The distance wasn't just physical, it was total. And if you think that's bad, the next one knew exactly how to get under Dylan's skin with a joke that wasn't even trying to be funny. Number 3 is Frank Zappa. Now, Zappa wasn't exactly known for being gentle with his words. He had sarcasm wired into his DNA, and he didn't mind swinging it around like a baseball bat. Across the 70s and 80s, he made a habit of mocking Dylan's voice, calling it a tragic accident. And he didn't stop at the voice. Zappa took aim at Dylan's lyrics too, dismissing them as pseudo-intellectuals' ramblings, and for good measure threw in a jab at Dylan's fans, branding them as brainwashed sheep who thought they were enlightened. That's not exactly small talk. Most artists would just roll their eyes and move on, but Zappa had a way of making it personal. The defining moment came at a Laurel Canyon party where a mutual friend thought it would be a good idea to get the two of them to shake hands and clear the air. That friend must have been living in a fantasy. Dylan refused to extend his hand, which turned the air awkward fast. Zappa, never one to waste an awkward moment, smirked and said, "I hear silence is your best verse." That was the last straw. Dylan didn't fire back with words. He just turned and left the party within minutes. To Dylan, this wasn't witty banter. It was about dignity. Zappa's jabs weren't clever in his eyes, they were cruel, cutting, and unnecessary. And once you hit that nerve with Dylan, you don't get back in his good books. If Zappa thought he'd get another chance, he was dreaming, but at least Zappa kept it face to face. The next person's betrayal played out in public for decades. Number 2 is Joan Baez. Once upon a time, Dylan and Baez were the royal couple of the folk scene. They weren't just making music together, they were marching in protests, singing anthems for civil rights, and standing shoulder to shoulder as the voice of a generation. They had that rare kind of musical partnership where it wasn't just about the songs, it was about the mission. And then 1965 happened. Dylan walked onto the stage at the Newport Folk Festival with an electric guitar, and the world tilted. For Dylan, it was artistic evolution. For Baez, it was abandoning the cause. She saw it as him walking away from the shared mission they'd built, the activism that gave their music its urgency. And she didn't keep her disappointment quiet. Baez publicly criticized his shift away from political songwriting, framing it as losing purpose. She tried to pull him back toward activism, urging him to return to the protest roots they'd shared, but Dylan had already decided to chase personal, surreal poetry instead. He didn't throw public shade back at her, but his response was a silent one that lasted for over 4 decades. He refused to collaborate with her again. No duets, no tours, no rekindled folk partnership. And if anyone ever asked him privately about the rift, he kept it short. "She sang for the people, I was singing for myself." That one line says everything about why the break was permanent. Still, for as painful as that split was, it didn't have the same surgical coldness of the next one, where Dylan simply erased the other person from existence. Number 1 is Lou Reed. This is where Dylan's style of revenge hits its purest form: total erasure. Back in 1974, Reed sat down for an interview and decided to light a match. He didn't just toss out mild criticism, he went straight for the jugular, dismissing Dylan's lyrics as smoke and mirrors and branding him a poet of self-importance. That's not just disagreeing with someone's style, that's challenging the very core of what they stand for. And if there's one thing Dylan has never taken lightly, it's when someone reduces his life's work to a cheap magic trick. The expected next move would have been a rebuttal, maybe a sly lyrical dig, or some public exchange of barbs. But Dylan wasn't interested in giving Reed the satisfaction of a headline feud. Instead, he did something far colder. He erased him. From that point forward, there were no mentions of Reed in interviews, no nods in liner notes, no tributes in speeches or memoirs. In Dylan's world, Lou Reed became a ghost that had never walked the earth. It was as if the Velvet Underground and everything Reed had done simply didn't exist. And it wasn't a temporary freeze-out either. This silent treatment lasted for decades. By the early 90s, during a Rolling Stone interview, a journalist casually brought up Reed's name, probably expecting a story or at least a wry comment. Dylan didn't even flinch. He looked up from his cigarette, gave a small smirk, and asked, "Who?" That single word carried more sting than 1,000 insults. It wasn't said as a joke, it was the kind of deliberate, matter-of-fact dismissal that leaves nothing to argue with. You can't fight back against someone pretending you don't even exist. It's the ultimate power move. In Dylan's mind, the Velvet Underground had walked a creative road he'd helped build years earlier, and instead of showing respect or gratitude, Reed had chosen to take potshots. That broke an unspoken code, and when that happens, Dylan doesn't send flowers or write reconciliatory verses. He wipes your name clean out of his story, and once you've been erased from Dylan's universe, there's no rewrite, no comeback, and no second chapter. Drop your thoughts in the comments on which feud shocked you the most, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next untold story from music's wildest legends.